Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Please excuse all of our awkward conversating just between the two of us. Here's the plan for this evening. I'm gonna just kind of lay out the premise and the basic idea of this webinar. Offer a little bit of theoretical input on things. Just give us a sense of what we're going to be talking about. Then we're going to do a little demonstration. My business partner Lindsay, who's here, you'll see her in just a moment. We're going to do a little short counseling demonstration to show you how we work with exogenous factors in session. We won't, in that demonstration, we won't specifically be talking about the coronavirus, but we'll be able to kind of connect the dots and help you understand how it is that we work with those and how you might be able to apply this to our current situation. Okay, so that's where we'll start, and then I'm really hoping to leave plenty of room for Q&A at the end so that we can have some interaction, and so I can help anybody if maybe I'm not being super clear about something. Lindsay also is going to be letting me know if there are questions during the presentation, but you're just going to have to work with us on that. This is again, we're really new to live streaming, and so some of this might get a little awkward or strange. We might have to work out some kinks. So if you're just now joining us, I see maybe we had one other person join. If you can just comment on the chat bar on the right side of your screen, that'll log you in and should help you. It'll kind of function as your official sign in to the webinar. Okay, so who am I? My name is Calvin Armerding. I am a senior associate here at Travelers Rest Counseling Associates in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. We are actually, this is my office right here, where I do all of my clinical work, even these weird telehealth meetings that I've been having the past week. I come here to do them, so I have my space. My partner Lindsay Hill is here with me. She's also a senior associate here at Travelers Rest Counseling Associates. She'll be joining me in just a little bit for a counseling demonstration. I have been fortunate enough to be trained by some really wonderful Adlerians. Frank Walton, some of you are Romanian guests. I'm guessing you probably know Frank from his work there. I've also been trained by Dr. Wes Winget, who maybe you know him if you've been to Adlerian conferences, and I know that he's done a bunch of training abroad. Paul Rasmussen, some of these guys have been incredibly helpful and formative in my development, both professionally and really personally too. But they are the ones who really introduced me to the theories of Alfred Adler, whose theories I use almost exclusively in my work as a clinician. And so one of the things that Alfred Adler talked about and wrote about was something called an exogenous factor. And Paul Rasmussen, I think, has the best short and sweet definition of what an exogenous factor is. It's basically a challenge that we come upon in life for which we are not prepared when we come upon it. And so you could think that might be both, we might call them good things or bad things. You know, obviously, if you have a traumatic experience, or perhaps the death of a loved one, or maybe you're just not prepared for the rigors and terrors of middle school when you start 6th grade, or maybe you win the lottery. I don't know anybody who's really prepared for winning the lottery. These are all things that could count as exogenous factors, just challenges that we come upon in life that we're not prepared for when they happen. Now, the reason that Adler was interested in this particular idea of an exogenous factor is that what exogenous factors do is they push us to make a choice, okay, about how we're going to interact with that kind of a challenge. For those of you, it sounds like some of you really are coming. I know that Kevin, I know that you know a bunch about Adler, probably our Romanian guest who, Kevin, you're so right, they're crazy about Adler in Romania. Y'all might know this already, but perhaps some of you aren't familiar with Adler. So Adler's basic premise is this, that we all as human beings, we have feelings of inferiority. He said that to be human is to feel inferior, is to possess feelings of inferiority. So we look around at the world around us or at other people, and we notice that other people or things are bigger than us and more capable than us, and perhaps more experienced or more beautiful or more smart or whatever it might be. We are somehow less than. We feel that we're in a one down position. Now that doesn't require us to actually be less smart or less pretty or anything like that. It just means that we perceive and feel it to be so, that we're a little bit put back by life. We're in a one down position. Now our response to that is to strive for superiority, to get out of that inferiority feeling and to feel better. So we can think about it this way, right? That my brother, I had an older brother, and we played basketball together a lot growing up. Now, my brother's a really tall guy, 6'6" now, but when he was in 7th grade and I was in 5th grade, he outgrew my dad, and my dad is 6'1", so he was a 6'1" 7th grader. And you can imagine that I was quite a bit smaller in 5th grade, and we would play basketball together, and it's not really fair, right? Now, I felt that inferiority feeling. Okay, he's got 2 years on me, he's bigger, he's stronger, and he's most certainly taller. He's very, very long. And the way that I made up for that is that I just got meaner than my brother. And so I would, throw elbows and dive for balls, and I could foul him pretty hard, and some things like that. And that's how I kind of made up for it. That's how I strove for superiority. Now, Lydia Sitcher, who was a student of Adler's, has a really nice way of making an important differentiation for us. And that's that there's more than one way to strive for superiority. We can strive for superiority over others, okay, and that's a more competitive approach. She talks about Jacob's ladder, right? That at the top of Jacob's ladder is an angel, and down at the bottom is Jacob. And then on each rung, there's a place for only one person. And some people see life that way. Perhaps maybe we all see life that way sometimes. And so we feel like the only way to do well, to be at the top rung, is to climb over all the other people and push them down a rung so that we can have theirs. Okay, so that's what Sitcher called vertical striving. That's a competitive way of striving. There's also a different way to strive for superiority. So rather than getting superiority over other people, there's a way to get superiority with other people, to strive together alongside one another to move into a better position. And of course, if we could use the basketball metaphor again, it's one thing for me to play against my brother in basketball, and it's a whole other thing to play with him in basketball. And see, then my meanness, or we shouldn't say meanness, maybe my aggressiveness on the court becomes an asset to him, and his height becomes an asset to me, because now we're in cooperation with one another. We're striving towards a similar goal. We're wanting each other to do well. And that doesn't require us to be uniform, to have the exact same way of doing things or the exact same talents or size or strength, but rather our differences now become things that don't put us in competition with one another, but help us to cooperate with one another. Okay, so to circle back to exogenous factors. Exogenous factors are things that really require cooperation from us. They are a huge challenge that we're not really prepared for. And so what that means is that we really need in that moment to band together with others to be what we really are as a species, which is a cooperative people. We're deeply social, and really why we've been able to succeed so well as a species is because of our ability to cooperate with one another in incredibly large numbers. So an exogenous factor asks us to cooperate. Okay, and that's our horizontal striving, as Sitcher put it. We're striving for superiority with people. But here's often where we get ourselves in trouble, is that rather than responding to an exogenous factor by cooperating, rather we get competitive. And here's what we can do. Sometimes we can withdraw from the challenges of life. We can just withdraw from them altogether. And often that's going to be your depressive folks. Okay. But it also can look like conscripting others into your service. Okay. A kind of shifting your responsibility for taking on the challenge onto somebody else, which is different than cooperating, right? Cooperation says, boy, this is too big for me. let's do it together. And of course, then you're lending a hand and contributing. But you could also say, oh, this challenge is too big for me. You deal with it. You handle it for me because I'm out of my league. Okay? So this is what an exogenous factor really is. It's a challenge that we're not prepared for that either pushes us into cooperation with others, and that's the useful side of life, or what we're really striving for of health, or it pushes us into the useless side of life where we're more competitive, where we're oriented against people, or we're trying to conscript people into our service, or we're not lending a hand to humankind as a whole. So if there's any questions on anything that I shared so far, just leave that in the chat and we'll attend to that. But I'm gonna keep moving as much as possible. So here's a couple of things about Adler. Adler viewed people as being holistic, okay, and meaning that people are all one thing, okay, thoughts, feelings, cognitions, and they're all oriented in the same direction. And you see this is pushing a little bit against Freud, right, who had his id, ego, and superego that were really all kind of in conflict with each other. And you could bring them into equilibrium, right, but really id and superego, they're really pulling at each other, and maybe you need some ego development to balance that out. But you're not a unified whole. You've got all these separate parts that are doing battle and pulling and pushing with each other. Adler saw it much differently. He looked at it and he said, no, the person is a unified whole, and they're striving in one direction towards what he called a fictional finalism, an idealized goal that we set up for ourselves. That it's almost, we look at it and we say, if such and such could happen, then life would be meaningful and go well for me. Okay, and we're always striving toward that. Now, maybe we feel some dissonance or tension within ourselves, but even that tension is directed at that goal. So if we're indecisive, our indecisiveness is directed towards that final goal, that ideal that we seek, all as a whole. Now, why this is important for the exogenous factor, okay, is that when we come into contact with an exogenous factor, when we're presented with a challenge for which we're not prepared, what that means is that the way in which we choose to respond to that, the way in which we manage challenge, is consistent with our whole style of life. That's Adler's term for it, our whole style of life, our whole unified self moving in a certain direction. So in other words, if we think about it this way, right, that perhaps I'm a little bit depressive, and what life looks like to me is life will never go well for me. Nothing ever works for me. Okay, well then we come into contact with, let's say, the rigors of middle school, and I'm a rising sixth grader. Well, what that's going to do is it's my already existing belief that life doesn't go well for me, and therefore I should be excused from some of the responsibilities of life. It's going to flush itself out. Okay, maybe I've never encountered a sixth grade bully before, but when I encounter that sixth grade bully, my style of life is going to persist and continue, and I'm going to keep moving towards that, through that perception that nothing goes well for me, nothing ever works for me, and respond by shifting my responsibilities onto somebody else. Okay, now on the more positive side of life, if we're thinking about a more useful way to respond to a challenge, perhaps my holistic drive is to say that, well, I can be helpful, I can contribute, and the way in which I can contribute is by being kind to those who are mistreated. Well, then I come into contact with sixth grade bullies, and now my response to it is more cooperative in nature, that maybe perhaps I'm even able to empathize with the bully, not to excuse their behavior, but to empathize with the bully. And then also to have those hurt feelings that I experience that are, of course, very understandable, to look around and see it in other people who are being mistreated, and to be a support and encouragement. And this way we're moving out of a feeling of inferiority towards superiority, but with others, in cooperation with others, not doing battle or shifting our responsibilities onto somebody else. Okay, so here's why this is important. We've got this massive exogenous factor that's happening globally right now, right? We've got this global pandemic that you and I, okay, none of us are infectious disease experts, for one, at least that I know of. So we're already not very capable of handling this, but also all the infectious disease experts, they're constrained by time and money and laboratory workers and all those kinds of things, so that even they, can't really put a stop on this thing. Now, of course, there are things that we need to be doing that can help, but we certainly could look at this global pandemic and say, this is a challenge for which none of us were adequate. But does it cause us to try to escape the tasks of life, the demands of life? Or does it, do we move into a more useful side of life? Now, I'm going to press pause just for a second because I see that there's a couple questions. So, Kevin, you asked, can the term superiority also be called significance? Oh, yes, wonderful. Actually, that's straight out of Lydia Sitcher. He said, because my students always initially see striving for superiority as, sorry, can I read it? Striving to be better, more on top of. Wonderful. Really, really good question. That's that vertical versus horizontal striving piece that we were talking about earlier. If you certainly can strive for superiority in such a way that you're kind of muscling other people down so that you can rise above, right? But there's another way to go at it, and that's more significance. That's straight out of Lydia Sitcher. Great, great distinction there. Sometimes, we have these translation difficulties from German to English, and really maybe even it's just some of this stuff was written in the early not 19th, early 20th century, and not all of that translates to our modern diction and vocabulary choices. So, but great question. Certainly we can think of it as striving for significance, not just superiority over others. Really good question. Okay, now, to circle back to exogenous factors, we're facing this massive pandemic, and what it's asking of us is, are you going to cooperate with others, or are you going to escape the challenges of life or shift them on to somebody else to live on the useless side of life rather than the useful side of life? Okay, so here's why this can be useful to us as clinicians. I've had a bunch of clients this past week, not all of them, noticeably, that's kind of something to pay attention to. But I've had a lot of clients who I'm talking with over a virtual platform, and they're really freaked out, understandably, by this pandemic. And so the conversation, the content of our session, can really revolve a lot around this pandemic. And so then, somewhere in my head, I'm thinking, okay, of course, these are really valid feelings that we probably do need to discuss. And on another level, boy, we have these already existing diagnoses and treatment goals and things that we're trying to work on with you. And yet all of this time is getting taken up by this pandemic. But then, what are you supposed to do to say, oh, that's not important. Let's just, get back to your treatment goals, when clearly, this is something that's really important to them and has them freaked out. So here's how we can balance this, okay? Is just understand that people are a whole, okay? They're holistic. They're always moving in one direction. They're unified. And part of what that means is how they respond to this pandemic says something about the way that they manage challenges at large. So just a few examples of this would be, okay, perhaps some of you have noticed that for some, their way of responding to this pandemic is to learn as much as possible, okay? And so they're reading every article that pops up on social media, and they're posting about it and writing these, 85 paragraph Facebook posts or something like this. Some of them quite argumentative, right? And so their way out of this feeling of powerlessness is I'm going to gain power by knowing. Okay, now that's going to show up in their interpersonal relationships. It's going to show up in their work environment. It's going to probably have shown up in their family of origin and certainly their current family. It's going to show up in their friendships, all these kinds of things. That movement of the way to make life go well for you and to keep it from going terribly is to know, and to maybe even to know more than other people. And there's where you start to see the competitive nature, right? Now, knowing can be cooperative too, right? That the way out, the way to make things go well for you is to cooperate Well, knowing can be helpful there. Oh, I can know some things and share those with others in a way that's encouraging and helpful. And of course, we've seen plenty of this on social media as well. So that's just a way of seeing that the style of life continues, it persists, even in the face of a really new and unprecedented challenge like the one that we're facing right now. You've also maybe seen the folks who they look at it and they say, oh, it's no big deal. Everybody's freaking out. And you see, there's something about this, right, that's a little bit competitive. Everyone else is freaking out, and I am not. And therefore, you see, now we can start to hear the superiority-inferiority dynamics. I am better because I am not freaking out like everybody else is. My immune system can handle it. This isn't that big a deal. Other people are being irrational about this. And you see, this is a way that someone can make their way through life. Life will go well for me if I'm tougher and more stable and more put together and less intimidated by the things that the world throws at me than other people. Now that, of course, also can be that can show up on the useless side of life, where we're really elevating ourselves above other people. Or it can show up on the other end, where we are perhaps a little bit more stable and a little bit more calm about things, but now we can put that sense of calm to use for other people, where maybe we're not quite so afraid to go out to the grocery store as our neighbor, and so perhaps we could run them an errand, or before we run out the door to go get something, we could give them a call and say, hey, can I grab anything for you? Maybe some rolls of toilet paper if there are any left, anything like that. So again, we can show up on the useless or useful side of things. Last example, and then we're going to get to this counseling demonstration. Another example that keeps showing up is that perhaps somebody's already a pretty anxious person, and maybe the view that they take of life is the world's a very scary place, and you can't trust other people. Okay, well then a global pandemic comes along and they say, aha, see, I knew it. The world is so scary. And so you can't trust other people because there's all these people out and about, but some of them are just being irresponsible and spreading it around. And this gives me all the more ammo to support my idea that the world is a terrifying place and other people can't be trusted. And this, of course, allows us to excuse some of the responsibilities of life, one of which is to get along with other people. And it's really hard to get along with other people if you feel that the world's always out to get you and other people can't be trusted. So these are things we can look at the response that somebody's having to something like this global pandemic and just bounce it around and say, okay, this is part of their style of life. How does this response pop up thematically in how they manage their marriage relationship or their friendships or their work environment or their everyday life or their activities of daily living, all those kinds of things. Okay. Any questions about that, please type that in the chat over here, but I'm going to ask Lindsay to come up. I'm going to show you just a little bit about how my work with exogenous factors generally, not just with something like this pandemic, shows up in a counseling session. So a large part of what Lindsay and I do in our work with clients is something called lifestyle investigation, where we're just asking for a few bits of information about a client that allow us to see how they see the world, how they perceive the world, and how they've chosen to make their way through it. They're patterned with a client of mine. Now, she's going to tell me some true things about her, but we haven't talked about this before. Okay, this is all news to me. Well, I don't know, maybe we talked way back when, but certainly not today. We didn't rehearse any of this. So I might look like a real buffoon here in a moment, but we'll figure it out. This is what's fun about demonstrations. What we're going to do, I'm just going to ask her to tell me some things that she came upon in life, experiences that she came upon in life that she wasn't prepared for, that stick out to her. Now, that's something I just want to make a quick note on this. It's really important that these things stick out to her, right? Because there's probably thousands and thousands of things that she came upon in life that she wasn't prepared for, but these are the ones that she calls to mind. Lydia Sitcher talks about us having a grab bag of memories, and we reach down in and pull out and recall the ones that are most useful to us and fit our style of life. And so as I asked this of Lindsay, she's going to tell me about her style of life by telling me what things she wasn't prepared for and how she managed them. Okay, So here's what it might look like. Lindsay, I'm wondering, in our work together, if this might be something that could be helpful. Could you tell me maybe as many as 2 or 3 things? Maybe we could do more later, but at least 2 or 3 experiences that you had in life that when they happened, you didn't feel prepared for them at all.
Sure. My parents got separated.
Okay. So when your uncle was killed, when your mom had a stroke,
Yep.
and when your parents separated.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I mean, right away, we can just look at that and say, yeah, of course she wasn't prepared for those. I mean, those are pretty big wallops. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask just a few more details about each of these events, but I'm not going to get too tied down with the content of it. Okay. So how old were you when your uncle was killed?
About 19.
19
years ago.
Yeah. So you would have been a freshman in college. Okay, a lot of life transition going on at that point, trying to figure herself out, being away from her own family. These are all things that are just occurring to me as I'm thinking through this. Put myself in her shoes as best I can. Or, well, no, they're shoes today, not flip-flops. Okay, and how old were you when your mom had her stroke?
5.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I mean, we could only imagine what it's like to be a 5-year-old and to have something that significant happen to mom. That's got to be really scary. But we're going to check that out with her in a minute. Now, when your parents separated, how old were you?
Or about 13.
13 years old. Okay. Now, this is a tough one too, right? What's happening when you're 13? It's middle school. You're starting to come of age. You're starting to pay attention to romantic relationships and figure out how some of those things work, right? You have your first crushes, or maybe you're a little bit of the ways into that, but you're certainly still figuring it out. And then what you see is parents having this big lot of trouble and separating, and boy, that's got to be a kind of a confusing and scary thing. But again, we're going to check that out with her. Notice I'm making some initial guesses about what some of these things must have been like, but I really need to check it out with Lindsay and not make assumptions about how all this must have felt to her. Okay, now Lindsay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think. We're going to just take these one at a time, and I'm going to ask you a few clarifying questions about these. So your uncle was killed. Now, you say he was killed. He got in a car wreck. What happened there?
There was a road rage incident, and he was shot on the side of the road and died.
Yeah, I mean, this is really quite scary. Okay, so he's murdered. Now, when you found out this news, when you were presented with this challenge that you weren't prepared for, what is the emotion that really stuck out to you or sticks out to you as you think back on that?
Concerned.
Concerned. Okay. Now, I like the specificity of that. Concerned is a lot better than something like anxious. There's about 15 different flavors of anxious, or probably more than 15, but concern gives me a lot of specificity. Now, Lindsay, I want you to tell me, if you can, no right or wrong answer. For you, what's the precise opposite of that feeling of being concerned?
Free.
Free. Okay, now here's what I'm thinking with that, okay? Lindsay, in her style of life, in her unified, holistic style of life, she is moving away from concerns and towards freedom. And who could blame her? Okay, but that's where my brain is going, and how I'm starting to process things as I'm looking for her style of life. Now, Lindsay, I want you to imagine for a moment that this experience of your uncle being killed, I want you to imagine that it's like an Aesop's fable. Okay, in fables, like the tortoise and the hare, they always have a moral. Okay, and the moral of the tortoise and the hare: slow and steady wins the race. Right, and it doesn't matter how you tell the story, how many different ways you tell it. That moral we can always kind of pull out of it. Now, I want you to imagine that this experience, that it's a fable. What's the moral of the story? Short phrase, something like that.
Sometimes bad things just happen.
Okay. Now I have to write all this down, or it just flips out of my brain, and I can't keep up with it. Some of you may be able to just stay a little bit more engaged, but I have to write this down, or it just goes away. Okay, so sometimes bad things just happen. Okay, now just to be clear, if she gave me something that was really specific to the experience, right? Sometimes family members, terrible things happen to family members. Okay, it's more specific to that very experience, and I might ask her to generalize it a little bit more, to decontextualize it is the word I use sometimes with clients. But something like sometimes bad things just happen, that's about as general as you can get. Right? There's no real way to decontextualize it. That's perfect. Now, Lindsay, let's talk about your mom having a stroke. We will circle back to all this, okay? But let's talk about your mom having a stroke. What is the emotion that sticks out to you as you think back on that experience?
Brave.
You felt brave. Okay, now who would have expected that, right? I'm thinking, oh, that's so scary. That's got to be unsettling. No, what sticks out to her is brave. And this is why we always ask. Brave. Now, the precise opposite of brave for you?
Lonely.
Lonely. And again, who would have guessed that? That's certainly not what would have come to my mind, but tells me a lot about Lindsay. It tells me that she really wants to not feel lonely, and one of the ways to not feel lonely is to feel and be brave. Okay, that's really good for us to know. Now, same thing. Let's treat it like a fable. What would the moral of this story be?
Strong relationships can happen out of hardship.
Strong relationships can happen out of hardship. Okay. Now, what I want y'all to hear there, right, is, are we hearing competitive language or cooperative language? And that's it's very relational, right? It's to say, wow, we encountered something really difficult, and that brought us together, not put us in opposition to one another. Now, see, if she told me, we've got brave and lonely, okay? One thing she could have said, the moral is don't be like your brother who was such a wimp about it, okay? Now, that would have been competitive language, and we might see Lindsay using her bravery not to cooperate with people, but rather to put them down and say, I'm the bravest. I'm brave and some people aren't. And so I can always look down on them and feel superior. When hard things come along, I'll be brave, and then I'll peer down at all the non-brave folks. Okay, but instead we get strong relationships can happen out of hardship. That's a very encouraging thing to hear from her. Okay, now let's move down. Your parents separated.
Yeah.
What's the emotion that sticks out as you think about that?
Two come to mind. Can I do two?
You never turn down a second answer here. Go ahead.
Shocked and angry.
And angry. Shocked and angry. Very understandable feelings to feel. Now, no right or wrong answer, precise opposite of shocked for you?
The word that's coming to mind is protected.
Protected. Okay. And the precise opposite of angry.
Say what comes to mind. Satisfied.
Satisfied. Okay. Same thing. What I'm paying attention to is one of the ways that she wants to avoid shock is by being protected. And she can work her way out of her anger by getting satisfaction. Now, already I want y'all to notice, right? That can show up on the useless side of life or the useful side of life. That can move her into cooperation or competition with other people. When she's in cooperation, she's going to generally, she's going to be on the useful side of life. And so she's going to be more symptom free. I'm not going to say that it's going to be perfectly comfortable for her, but she's not going to get herself into chronic patterns that cause her trouble. But if she gets on the competitive side of things, she's going to make trouble for herself. And we'll talk more about that. We'll circle back around on all these. Okay, now let's give it a moral.
Protect yourself.
Protect yourself. Okay. Now, is that cooperative language or more,
I can hear
more
it
competitive, right? It's no one else will protect me, so I'll do it myself. And you hear, right, that there's a way to kind of set yourself up above others, right? I am so well protected that no one's assaults can touch me. This is competitive language rather than cooperative. And of course, we don't mean this in any way to criticize Lindsay, right? We can understand why she would go there after an experience like this. We totally can. But we also see what she's up to, perhaps. Protect yourself. Now, see, I really like these morals because we didn't even have to ask her to decontextualize any of them. They're already just brought. Sometimes bad things just happen. Strong relationships can happen out of hardship, and protect yourself. Okay. Now, here's what use I might make of this. Let's say that Lindsay came to me to work on some depressive symptoms. Okay, well, here's what I'm looking for. I want to know how free she feels. Probably not very. I wonder, there's a kind of flavor in sometimes bad things just happen. It could be that that's just a rational, really reasonable acceptance that, I mean, sometimes bad things do just happen, and that might be actually a good thing to carry through life. But see, it could also take on this other flavor of like, oh, it is what it is, and be quite hopeless, right? That there's a kind of resignation to bad things happening. And perhaps what happens, right, is that Lindsay starts to be quite on the lookout for all the things, the bad things that might happen to her. And maybe that causes some anxiety, but it also, anytime something bad happens, you say, yeah, see, this is how life goes. Sometimes bad things just happen and there's nothing you can do. And so what's the point? This might be part of the flavor of her depression. Now, if she comes to me anxious, okay, sometimes bad things just happen, might be, how can I keep on the lookout at all times for all the bad things that might happen so I can fend them off before they happen? How can I structure my life in such a way that all the bad things that could happen won't, right? That'd be a way to take it on. If she comes to me and she's got a significant anger management issue, sometimes bad things just happen might be a way for her to wash her hands of it, to say, yeah, I mean, sometimes people blow up and they throw plates at each other, you know, when they're in an argument. You see how it could take on all these different forms, and it would depend on whatever symptom she's presenting with, the meaning that these morals might take on. But we can be on the lookout for it. That's kind of what life means to her, is sometimes bad things just happen. That's at least part of what life means to her. And you could see how that might manifest itself with things like strong relationships can happen out of hardship. She probably is a person who, when you can imagine why she might be a great counselor, right? Because here she is, and people, what they're bringing in all the time is their hardship. And she knows that in their hardship, there's this opportunity for a strong, important relationship to form, and she forms it with them, right? And also can help them to form those relationships elsewhere. It's a wonderful thing to take with her. Protecting yourself. Well, you know, that can get quite, let's say that something bad happens to her. Perhaps she blames herself, right? And gets a bit depressed that way, where she says, the rule is you protect yourself, and I got hurt, and what that means is that I failed. I broke my own rule and didn't protect myself enough. Or maybe she's anxious because she's running around all the time protecting herself against every insult or injury possible. And of course, that's a fool's errand, and it's a pretty miserable way to live. But of course, it could, of course, manifest itself more healthily. But generally, people aren't coming to us for clinical help if things are manifesting in a positive way. Okay, so here's the deal. If Lindsay comes in and she's telling me about the coronavirus and this big pandemic and how difficult it is for her, well, what I can start to look for, right, is I can say, well, what's the emotion that sticks out to you from all that? Well, and let's just do it. What's the emotion that sticks out to you from this big pandemic?
Uncertain.
Okay, uncertain. And Lindsay, I know we're kind of in the middle of all this, but if you could assign a moral to this experience right now, what might it be? Oh, before we do that, can you tell me the precise opposite of uncertain for you? No right or wrong answer.
Calm.
Calm. Okay. Okay. And dude, assign it a moral if you can.
First thing that comes to mind is do what you can.
Do what you can.
Or like try and be as useful as you can.
Okay, and boy, she's just stealing words and she saying useful. But I mean, really, do what you can. That is being on the useful side of life. How many of y'all have had conflict or clients this week who, of course, they're trying to do things, to help. But I had a client this week. Well, let me think if this is too. I don't think this is too detailed a thing to share. It's certainly no identifying information, but he was afraid that he was going to go to sleep and never wake up. And of course, this is not how this very scary and very serious virus works. It doesn't just kill people in their sleep over the course of 6 or 7 hours. It's not how it works. And so his version of do what you can has gotten so large, right? And it's just another thing to be scared of that fits with his overall style of life. So these would be things that I might ask, and you could learn all this bit of information that absolutely relate to the overall treatment, the overall symptoms that you're working on with clients, whatever those might be. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing. This is super helpful. Well, I hope it was helpful for y'all. It's fun for me to do it. Okay, so we're going to kind of shift gears here. We've just covered what an exogenous factor is, why it's important, how it fits in Adlerian treatment, and how you might be able to put it to use in this particular weird cultural historical moment. But what I'd love to do now is just to pivot. We've got about 13 minutes. Is that right? 13 minutes left? Mm-hmm. And I'd love to field some questions for you guys. Those can both be about this specific topic, but also they can be a little bit more broad. About Adler or about how we do our work clinically or anything like that. Okay, now let's see. This is Frank, and I came a couple minutes late. As Calvin points out, may move from a minus to a plus on the vertical plane or the horizontal plane. Yes, such an important distinction there. Are we in cooperation or competition with other folks? Are we on the horizontal plane that's striving for superiority or significance with others? Whereas the vertical plane, it's that Jacob's ladder of, well, if I want to move up, somebody else has to go down. Okay, now Kevin, you asking a question. In real life, are you making hunches as you go along out loud with the client? And I'll read the whole question and the answer. Would you normally ask for their interpretation first or later after your hunches? Do you come out with a final summary interpretation? Well, that's a really good question. I'm not offering those hunches out loud. I'm doing that in this demonstration just to let you guys know how the wheels are turning in my brain, so that then perhaps at the end when I make a guess about something, you're like, well, how the heck did Calvin get there? But I'm not doing that in session. I'm just listening. And I'm turning all of my attention to, well, what do they have to tell me about this? So it's all going on, but it's going on quietly and silently in my head. At the end, do I come out with a final summary interpretation? Well, I mean, it would depend. For one, if I don't have a hunch to give, I'm not gonna give it. Sometimes I get to the end of a lifestyle investigation exercise, and I don't really. I'm a little lost still, and what that means is that I just haven't listened or learned enough. Okay, and there's no knock on me, right? I mean, I'm just I'm not a mind reader, and so I just need to gather some more information. And so it might just be, well, I'm going to go back to asking more questions. And sometimes a session will end, and I'll say, well, I need to ask more questions next time because I'm not quite there yet. But certainly, if I do have a hunch, I offer that. I give a kind of final summary, and it always goes like this. This is strength from Frank Walton. The words "could it be" are such powerful words in a therapy session that we can look at a client and say, well, could it be that, the moral that you took out of that experience was to protect yourself? Could it be that that's maybe showing up a little bit in how you're going about life now? That it kind of seems like you look around the world and you're looking for threats to protect yourself from. I mean, how does that sound to you? And it's always a guess. And the great thing about making guesses is that if we're right, well, then wonderful. And we've gained a little bit of rapport with the client, and they say, wow, I mean, they kind of know their way around my head, and they sure are seeming to understand what I'm saying. But if we're wrong, then often what happens is because we made a hunch, our client, they then have something to edit or what's the word I'm looking for? To alter so that it's correct. They say, well, no, it's not quite that. It's more like, and then they can fill in the blank, and then we've learned something new. And that's always a wonderful thing. I try to go out of my way with clients to let them know up front that I'm going to make some guesses during our work together, but that I want them to know up front that I'm not ever married to some theory that I'm putting out there, but that I really invite and enjoy even them saying, no, Calvin, that's not quite right. It's more like such and such. And so if they know that I enjoy that and they get an invitation from me, then sometimes they're a little bit more eager to respond in that way. And that's a really exciting process. Okay, now the prepositions are so important. This is also from Kevin. The prepositions are so important. Over, with, under, below, to, toward, etc. Do you listen for the exact wording they use as indicators too? And on another note, Frank is awesome, by the way. Frank is awesome. It's so wonderful to have him as a mutual friend with some of you. Okay, Kevin, I love that insight. The prepositions, they really are incredibly important, and they are things that I listen to, but I take them as, let's say, a piece of a puzzle. So they're important, but I don't make a decision or an assumption if there's a word, perhaps a competitive word like over or something like that comes into what my client's sharing. But I certainly pay attention. I say, it's a little bit of competitive flavor there, and I need to pay attention to it. And let me not assume things or make too many decisions too soon. I can check it out with the client. It's more could it be kinds of things. But yeah, I'm really paying attention to those. And then maybe, but here's the other thing that I'll say. There are moments where we as therapists, we can get a little too tied up in the details of things, and we can kind of miss the forest for the trees. And of course, if Adler, he talks so much about that law of movement, right? That we're always moving in a certain way towards a desired state or an ideal or fictional finalism. And sometimes if we can get a little too high definition or a little too zoomed in on what our clients are doing or saying, and if we do that, then it's going to look like they're going over this way. But if we zoomed out, we can see, they're really going this other way. And that's not because the client is at odds with themselves. It's more like, if I want to get to St. Louis, okay, which is it's pretty west of here. I've got to go straight north to Asheville to get there, okay? And so if all I'm looking at is, well, right at this moment on this road, I'm going north, then I don't really know my final destination. And that's more what will give us a good clue about what clients are up to and help us to understand their symptoms. If that makes sense. Are there more questions that I'm missing?
No. Did anybody else join?
I don't think so. So I'm seeing 8 people involved right now. Does that seem right with our participant list? Okay. Linz, do you have any questions that might be helpful for people? Okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit here quite awkwardly for another 5 minutes because we have 5 minutes left. But if nobody has any more questions, that's okay. It's really been awesome to have you guys with us. What I can do, unless another question pops up, I'll attend that right away if it pops up. But what I can tell you about is that for the next 3 Thursdays, we're going to have more of these webinars. Next week, we're going to have one on ethics in private practice. Lindsay and I have had the privilege of being able, we had the privilege a few years ago of really designing our private practice. And so we got to be really intentional about how we came to decisions about little, minutia or things that don't, often seem all that important, like a cancellation policy. But we got to really think through how can we have mutual respect with clients and engender a spirit of equality with our clients in the way that we handle some of those small, minute decisions, even with just policies and procedures. So it might even sound a little bit dry, an ethics presentation for private practice, but I think it'll be pretty interesting and offer us some opportunity to think about some things. Also, if you're in the United States and specifically in South Carolina, there have been some changes to the requirements that we need to fulfill for continuing education. And one of those requirements is that we get more hours in ethics-specific courses, and this would be a good way to knock one of those out. So you can join us for that. We also have one on early recollections. We'll show you how we do that. If you enjoyed this counseling demonstration on exogenous factors, this one that we'll do on early recollection should be a lot of fun for you to watch. Just let you know how we handle those. Lots of people handle them differently, but you can see some of that. And then the last one that we'll do, this will be on April 23rd, I think, April 23rd, will be mitigating anxiety from a pandemic. So helping us understand how to really be helpful in regards to empowering clients to manage anxiety well. Some of the things that we do with really, really good intentions with clients sometimes can amp up anxiety rather than help move it down. So that'll be a kind of a fun thing, and that'll also be from an Adlerian perspective. Now, I see maybe, okay. Again, Frank, yes, so important to let client know I will count on you to keep me on track. That's such a, I can hear you saying it. I miss hearing you say it in person. That is, I've heard you say it before. That's a wonderful way to put it. For one, right, one thing I love about that, Frank, is that you let a client know that they have something to offer. It's not, they don't just sit back and you do all the important stuff as the therapist, but that they really have something to contribute and offer, which is a wonderful message to give to them. And then also, it's just, boy, there's so much mutual respect and a feeling of equality of you're the expert on you, and boy, I'm really going to really need your help to make sure that I'm saying things that are true and helpful to you. Boy, makes me miss you to read that. Oh, and there's a question about that. Thanks for the from Kevin. Thanks for the insightful program. Can you give us a minute on the precise opposite feeling technique? Yes. Okay. So I just shamelessly stole this from Wes Winget, who's an Adlerian out in Nebraska. He often asks clients this. If they give him an emotion word, he'll ask, "And what's the precise opposite?" And they offer that. And part of what's so nice about this little technique, it takes a grand total of 5 seconds to ask this, but it gives us so much more information about the emotion that the client initially offered. So if I say, well, I felt really sad. Okay, well, again, there's just so many flavors of sad. a client could mean so many different things by that. And so we have a very vague understanding of how they're feeling. But if we ask, well, what's the precise opposite of sad? And they say, well, I felt really left out. Or part of the group would be the precise opposite. Well, now we know that it's a kind of left out sad that we weren't aware of before. Maybe that we thought it was a kind of feeling of loss or of concern or hurt or something like that. And so to get those dynamics, so helpful. And when it costs you a grand total of 5 seconds in a session, it's really hard to pass up such a powerful technique that's really intuitive, easy for clients, and gives the therapist so much information, and really that can really help move therapy forward. So, okay, if there's no last minute questions, we're at 6:30. So congrats. We've gotten through this thing and without too many hiccups, I think. Lindsay's going to work with you on all the official stuff like certificates. Is there anything I need to tell them about any of that?
Just be sure to complete the evaluation form and email it back to me, and then I will send the certificate.
Okay. She's going to send if you didn't hear that through the mic, she's going to send an evaluation form. If you'll fill that out, send it back to her, she will immediately send you back a certificate of completion. Please do join us for the next few. Kevin, I know that you're going to be coming to these. I'm really excited about that. Also, feel free to email me if you have a question that pops up in the near future. My email is Calvin, CALVIN, @travelersrestcounseling.com. You can email me anytime. It doesn't matter if it's in the next week. Or you can email Lindsay, LINDSAY, not EY, SAY, @travelersrestcounseling.com. We'd love to hear from you guys, love connecting with other clinicians, and love being helpful in any way that we can. Thank you so much for joining. Hope to have you with us next week.